Welcome to the Fatherhood Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Pluff. Each week, we will cover various topics that dads struggle with in their fitness journey. I'll give you actionable steps that you can apply right away, not only to take back control of your own health, but so you're able to be a better example for your kids too. To this week's episode of the Fatherhood Fitness Podcast, Take 2. We are here with Miles Suing. We actually recorded an episode a couple of weeks ago, and the audio was not great quality on my end, and so had to make some updates, invest in some new equipment. But Miles was very understanding, and he was gracious enough to come back on the show to make sure we can give you an episode that is up to par. So I'm gonna let Miles introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
I'm not back because he wants me back for a second time right away. We had audio. But yeah, to introduce myself, so I am a fitness coach in Toronto, Canada, and Anthony and I met at a conference back in February in Dallas, Texas. So it was cool to connect in that way to sort of, we work with different populations. I work more with just more career-oriented people, not necessarily parents who are, busy in a different way than parents. So a lot of what I say might resonate with some of you too, especially with dealing with, the lack of time, lack of maybe sleep, lack of just the maybe motivation to get into, working out. So hopefully what I say resonates with you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Miles introduced me to a restaurant called Kava. Is that how you say it? Kava.
Kava. But that wasn't me, by the way. We don't have it up here, but it's a great restaurant.
Okay, that was Mike. That was Mike. That he must have. But anyway, I actually saw another one of those. It's fine. It's not Chipotle, but it's fine. But But yeah, so Miles and I work with completely different populations here. But as far as fitness goes, as far as nutrition goes, a lot of the principles are the same, right? You're busy, you're struggling to find time to do things, and I know Miles is great at that. Helping create plans for his clients. And when we talked last time, nobody else heard that except us, but we talked a lot about kind of the differences between like kind of online training, working in person. And Miles does both. I do both as well, and I know that eventually both of us would like to just be online full time, because one, there's lots of benefits, but two, you can actually reach a lot more people, and you can actually have a much more custom plan, right? I've had like the clients I know I work with in person. We only see each other a couple times a week tops, right? We only see each other a couple times a week. But my clients who I work with online, I'm able to communicate with, multiple times a week, every single day if they wanted to. And we have check-in calls every 2 to 3 weeks or so. But Miles, when you're working with clients, I know there's obviously, like, we have a scope of practice, right? When we're working in person, there's almost more restrictions, if you say. Not saying that we're not following, legalities and stuff online. Like, obviously, like for me, like I'm precision nutrition level 1 and 2 certified. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you are as well, or just level 1?
I got both.
Level 1. You have both. Awesome. Yeah. And so like we obviously we have like the expertise, we have the experience, but when you're working with a client in person and they come to you and they're asking nutrition advice as well, how do you kind of navigate that?
So in person, it's a bit tougher to do that because you're only there with that person within usually it's an hour session. So, usually the people come to us, usually in a gym, they'll want to do the workout with us. And a lot of times the workout takes precedence over anything else, right? So we do the workout, you warm up, you do the thing, lift weights, cardio, maybe a little bit of cardio. And that leaves little time and bandwidth for anything else. So, you know that nutrition is such a complex topic that if you only spend 5-10 minutes, you're only going to cover so much. It's just scratching the surface. So
Right.
you're almost doing a disservice by just doing that. And like you would have to allocate at least, 20-30 minutes to really dive deep, especially in the beginning. Like maybe later on, sure, maybe we'll just do like check-ins on how that person's doing. But compared to online, which is giving the client a little bit more independence as far as workouts go. So we're not taking up or eating up the whole hour or the whole time just to look at the workout. That gives us a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Plus, a lot of times, if you in person you talk about nutrition, it usually happens at the end. At least in my case, the
Mhm.
client is tired or the client is maybe thinking of something else at that point. It's not like a fresh, open mindset at that point. Not saying
Yeah.
everyone, but usually that's the case. So it's almost more worth it to have a separate session just for nutrition. And that's if we're going to talk about online, it's easier to allocate that because we're not limited by this 1 hour block that we have. We can communicate through messaging, we can communicate through
Mhm.
video just like this. Like I'm in Canada, you're in Kansas City. So, that distance, the time, there's a little bit more flexibility that allows us to discuss whether it's nutrition, whether it's other health habits you have.
Yeah, no, I think you explained that perfectly. I've had clients I work with in person reach out about nutrition and stuff, and there really is just no time, right? There's no time. Typically, the clients who I'm working with in person, we're really focusing on their form, right? We're really focusing on making sure they're doing the movements correctly, and so it can be difficult. A lot of times, you see trainers and their clients talking back and forth, but unless it's an experienced client. Sometimes I don't talk too much when I'm working with clients, like because I'm helping, I'm making sure they're feeling it where they're supposed to, they're moving with good quality form, and so that they don't get hurt, right? And uh, typically clients are scheduled back to back, so there really isn't just a lot of time to talk about nutrition, and not enough time. Not enough time to actually explain anything in detail, right? Like obviously, your clients probably have their beliefs already, and so sometimes they'll say things about different foods and things like this. And it's like I don't even have time to like respond to it. It's just like I think it can be hard because it's like it's almost like it's like reading a post, like a Twitter post that you see on like Instagram, Facebook or something without reading the caption, right? That's what happens a lot of times. That's what happens a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
when you like, even if you're at like a family dinner or something like that, or your aunt has some nutrition advice or something, or I can't eat this because this is so fattening or something like that. Like you don't even have, like it's not even worth like getting into that conversation, because it's like there's so much nuance there, and that's why I really love working online, because like yes, we spend time talking about the workouts, we spend time helping them create a program, but the majority of the coaching online, at least for me, is nutrition, right? The
Mm-hmm.
workouts, like I would say like 90% of it is spent on nutrition and mindset, right? And the mindset
Yeah.
around nutrition. When personal training in person, 95% of it is we are focused solely right there on the workout, right? And so I think just having that aspect online. Do you currently have any clients where you train in person, but then they come to you like more like a hybrid approach where they do some of the nutrition online?
Trying to think. Very little. I'm actually curious what your take is on this because
Mhm.
I still have one foot in the in-person world, and I
Yeah.
talk to some coaches who are purely in person, and what they say is, I'm I stopped talking about nutrition because for whatever reason, like clients just don't care enough. It's like I'm just going to focus on working out, and then we're in the middle of that, and
Yeah.
we're still trying to juggle that, right? So I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've actually, so I used to tell people that like I'm an online personal trainer, right? And then I kind of shifted to online fitness coaching. Now, most of the time, I usually say like I do fitness and nutrition coaching, or just simply nutrition coaching, like online nutrition coaching, because it gets like explaining is. I'll give you an example here. And so uh, when uh, when like COVID happened, everything shut down. I was teaching in person. I was doing elementary PE at the time, and like obviously clients went online, teaching went online, and everybody asked like, well, how do you teach PE online? Are you doing like group fitness class? Like, no, that's not what we're doing. You know what I mean? And then I took a job after that where I'm teaching like physical education and health online, where like we have like lessons and we have like a curriculum. You know what I mean? And so it's like people just assume like online personal training, we're just working out with them online. And some coaches do that. There are coaches who they do like fitness classes, right? I do not do that personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I usually tell people now, like I do like nutrition coaching or fitness. I don't say online personal trainer because it's hard to explain to some, like you're just gonna watch me work out or something. And
Yeah.
so for in person clients, I think you nailed it there. Like as much as I want to, like I love the nutrition side of things, um, and so like I could talk about it all day long. But when I'm working with a client in person and things like that, I don't talk about it too much. I don't actually. I really don't say anything. I don't say anything about it unless they ask like specifically and stuff. And so I think that's where. And so I work. I train part time out of a gym. It's locally owned, and they they don't have a non-compete, and so literally I could take all their clients. Right? I don't do that. I don't do that, and I don't talk about like my online training there at all unless someone brings it up, because I personally feel
Mhm.
like just kind of like awkward about it. Like I I have a pretty good gig there where they let me come when I want to. They let me train as little or as much as I want to, and I was like, I want to be respectful of that. I've been there for you. You know what I mean? I was like, and so I don't want to take that away. And so like if someone does ask, that's why too I always just say I do nutrition coaching. And so
Yeah.
it's like completely different and stuff. And so I think, and I think it's really hard. I treat client like my client came to me for workouts, right? And so
Yeah.
if they want more than that, like that's something separate. And so I I don't know. I struggle with that. I mean, I don't know if I gave you a great answer there, but I think that that's really hard. I think that's also why um, what kind of drew me to online more, um, doing like the nutrition side of things, right? Because I don't need to be there in person to do a nutrition coaching. So we could do this over Zoom. You know what I mean? I don't need to
Yeah.
be there. Like I'm not gonna watch you eat. You know what I mean? And so it's like, but we can talk about, we can create a game plan. We can figure out these things. So that's kind of what drew me to that. But yeah, as far as like having clients like in person, like very rarely will we ever have a discussion about nutrition unless they ask something very specific, I guess.
Right. Yeah, and I think you brought up an important point too of sort of how you market it, right? How you present it when they're starting out, the expectations that come with that. So you're saying that in person they come to you for the workouts and that's what you give them, versus if it's
Yeah.
online, you tell them you're a nutrition, fitness coach, whatever it is. So they expect more than just workouts from you. So yeah, I think definitely just got to meet that person where they're at in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
I didn't answer your
that,
question,
this
but
is something I
I totally
actually,
forgot.
no, no, that's good. And that leads me into another question. I actually saw this post today. I actually saw this post today. Somebody said something about, um, you were saying there, like, kind of meeting them where they're at. Um, so I saw somebody post today about, um, what you think you want is this, but what you actually want is and so it's like what you think you want is a six pack or something, but what you actually want is consistency. You want and I guess without giving too much of my thoughts on it right away, where do you kind of sit with that when clients come to you and they have a specific goal in mind? How do you work with them to not only help them achieve what they want to, but also help create a foundation, something that they can stick to like after they stop working with you?
So I find that in the beginning, like people will tell you, hey, like let's say I want to lose, X amount of pounds. Usually that's very surface level, right? And that could be just because maybe their doctor told them, hey, you got to do this, and they'll do it. It might not be actually what they want to do. So
Yeah.
it's up to us to really get to the bottom of that. It could be something, if you ask and dig deep enough, it could be like, oh, like my dad is like prone to whatever disease, and I don't want to end up like him when I'm, 67 years old. So
Yeah.
a lot of times with fitness marketing, it's all these more aesthetic, more surface level goals or aspirations that people chase, which there's totally nothing wrong with that. But if you just focus on that surface level goal, yeah, sure, you'll get them to do stuff for a few weeks, maybe a few months. But if you really want to help someone at a deep core level that they can keep up for, months, years down the road, you really got to find out what that reasoning is and then speak to that and try to address that with your coaching relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I like what you said there, just help them kind of achieve what they want to, but also, help kind of give them the tools there. And I think sometimes, we get like you mentioned there, like there's a lot of like fitness coaches who focus on like aesthetics and stuff. But probably the past couple years, we've almost shifted away from that, right? Where it's like taboo to talk about looking good with your shirt off or wanting to go to the beach. You know what I mean? Now it's all about health, like improving your health and stuff like that. At least with,
Mm-hmm.
and so like we work with different populations, but at least with some of the people I work with, some of the dads I work with, like looking great with your shirt off is going to keep them much more engaged, much more focused in our time together than improving their cholesterol levels. Like which one's going to help them long term? Yeah, improving your health and stuff. But I think sometimes as coaches, we feel we feel like we know more about what our clients want than what they want, what they actually want. But it's like sometimes they're just sometimes I don't think they're like comfortable. Maybe it's our messaging as a whole. Maybe it's our messaging
Mm-hmm.
like we know more about it, like what you want is this, but what you actually want is this. And so maybe they're just not like, it sounds really good. Like I want to, I want to get in great
Yeah.
shape so I can spend more time with my kids and not be as tired. That sounds really cool. But if what you really want is to look incredible walking on the beach this summer, which plan are you going to stick to? You know what I mean? And so it's like, I think,
Yeah.
like, I think, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not knocking on that goal at all. Like that's a legit goal. Uh, and there is a side of fitness. So I mean, I myself even I still have clients who are like that who just want to look good naked, and that's
Mm,
a completely legit goal. So it's that what my point was is just trying to really find out where that's coming from. It's if it's really just
yeah.
this person just wants to get laid, then that's their goal, right? But
Yeah.
if it let's say there is that population too who are just like, hey, I want to be able to keep up with my kids. Great. So everyone has different goals. Everyone has
Mm,
wherever you are on that spectrum. It's up to us to find that out, not push our own beliefs onto them, right?
yeah.
And just figure out where they can start with.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I think it's important for like coaches to had that in some of their messaging as well too. Is like, like your goals are your goals, right? Your goals are your like. I had a client who, like we talked about, separating kind of the fitness and nutrition with people coming to us. I had a client who I've worked with for over 3 years, and she was training for the Army combat fitness test, right? And so that's what we trained for every single time. Like we want to improve those numbers and stuff. It's like that, but like I think like if I would have told her like day one, like, you think you want to do this, what you actually, you know what I mean? It's like, and so it's like she was very specific on what she wanted and stuff. And so I think that's kind of, like figuring out, like, obviously, like, if someone's not actually telling you what they want, I think that's where, they kind of lose some of that motivation to work out, right? If they come to you and they tell you, I really just want to get healthy, I want to get, in better shape, I want to live longer and stuff like that. But what they actually wanted was something else. Like, I think that's where, good coaches come in. But when you, well, one thing I was thinking about, so, like we talked about earlier, Miles and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and so we got to talk about a couple of different things there. And one thing we talked about at the very end was about, kind of like being an example, right? Being an example, like for your kids, letting your kids see you work out and stuff. When you were a kid, Miles, what did you think of fitness? Like what kind of example around, fitness and nutrition did your parents set for you?
So for me, the biggest example or role model was my dad. So back then,
Mm-hmm.
they called it jogging, right? So that's what he did. He would take me almost every Sunday to the park nearby, and he would just do laps around.
Oh,
Obviously, I can keep up with him, so like I would just like sit there while he runs around. And then later
mm-hmm.
on, he introduced me to sport and on to riding a bike, so things like that. But from a very young age, that was put in my head. And like he didn't push anything on me. He just did his thing, and I
Yeah.
was just fascinated. I tried to keep up, tried to do what he was doing. Obviously, my dad wasn't like a high level runner or anything like that. He was just doing it just to get moving, and
Yeah.
that carried over to me as I went through school. I played sports. I was just all sorts of active. Like I was one of these kids who could never just sit and do nothing.
Mm.
That which makes sense why I do this for my a living. Is like you
Right.
couldn't get me to work at a desk job like in an office, right? So it made sense for me, and that just goes to show how powerful that impact can be just by modeling that to someone's kids, right? Just you don't have to do anything specific with them. You don't have to throw them into like a workout class. Just by letting them see that you're working out, this is a totally normal thing that mom
Mm-hmm.
and dad can do, and it's good. It's good, fun stuff. It rubs off on the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great example. Just having them, having your parents allowing you to like see them do things, right? I remember when I was younger, like my dad, neither one of my parents ever went to the gym, but like my dad, um, like played like slow pitch softball on the church team and stuff, and like that. Funny enough, that's what I'm doing tonight. I'm gonna play old man softball, but like my mom would do like workout videos, the first one I remember was Richard Simmons, like these like at home group workouts that the videotapes that they could do and stuff. And so like my mom was doing that. She would always went on walks. She would always go on walks, and a lot of times I would go with her and stuff. And so I think that set a great um, probably example for me. You know what I mean? Like, but one thing, kind of a negative side, and I don't. So I had this conversation with somebody else, and I don't know where this came from, but we grew up in a time. So you're a few years older than I am, but we grew up in a time where like we went through tons of different like diets. Like there was like Slim for Life, there
Mhm.
was Weight Watchers, there's Atkins, there's all these things, and all of that happened when we were in we were in like middle school, elementary school, middle school, high school, things like that. And when I think back on these things, like it almost feels like one of my parents was always trying a a diet, right? Like not that they were like extremely overweight or anything, but they were always wanting to lose. They weren't like this food's fattening or something like that, or I got to cut back a little bit and stuff. And I think like I know at least for me personally, I think I got a lot of that in my head. You know what I mean? And so and I think that probably shaped some of like my perception of like food and maybe some of the things that I struggled with too. And so I don't know, maybe it was different for you, but did your parents ever like talk to you about nutrition or anything? At least anything that like you could think back that like had kind of a profound effect on kind of maybe how you got to where you are today.
So for me, my experience growing up with food wasn't like your typical North American upbringing. So first of all, my I immigrated with my parents here when I was 15. So that whole
Hmm.
North American diet did really become that apparent in my life until then. So before that, like we lived in
Hmm.
Asia, and it's a very varied diet. People eat everything from fish, meat,
Yeah.
everything. I mean, people do here too, but it's a little different over there. So I wasn't really as exposed to the more North American diet culture until really like my late teens. So that's
Hmm.
probably a big influence on how I eat. Now, in terms of like
Yeah.
diets, like quote unquote diets, so like the closest thing I've had an experience with on that would be I don't remember the name of that, but my dad, because he has a history of high cholesterol, so he was starting to eat a little
Hmm.
healthier. I don't know, maybe like 15 years ago, and
Hmm.
but this is when I lived back home, maybe more than 15. And he would start to cook more, like things like fish and like leaner meats. So
Hmm.
that rubbed off on me as well. Um, but that's not even really like a full diet. It was just more like little tidbits from my parents. Like my mom never really allowed me to drink, like Coke until I
Hmm.
was like in my teens. Really, like she as a kid, she was like, "You can't drink Coke.
Yeah.
You can't drink any of these like sugary carbonated drinks." Um, I mean, I did like when she wasn't there, but still,
Yeah.
that still rubbed off on me. So little things like that. I know I'm not like your like typical like grew up in a typical Canadian household. So, but yeah, if we're going back to the influence of my parents on me, there is a significant. Um, I would say mostly positive, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I think that's really cool. We obviously have two completely different lives and stuff, different upbringings and stuff. But I think you can see just how like your environment shapes that, right? If your parents are setting a certain example and it's a positive one, then whether it's positive or negative, it's going to have an effect on you. You mentioned not drinking soda or your parents not letting you drink pop like a Coke or anything like that. I was just
Mhm.
thinking, so I'm literally drinking an energy drink right now, and that's one thing I've thought about is like having my kids see that, you know what I mean? Like I remember just my kids are young, but like they already know like that's dad's drink, right? That's what dad like. We saw it at the grocery store from like half an aisle away, and my daughter, she's 2, she was like, "Daddy, that's your drink," And I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
like my need to work on that." And so it's just like, and they know it's called an energy drink, and so like that's something I think about too. Like, is that what the exact? And I'm not saying like you can never have an energy drink or the worst thing in the world for you, but it makes me very like intentional, right? Like kind of like when I'm eating and stuff. One thing my wife and I always try really hard to do is we don't have a lot of reaction when we're trying something new, right?
Mhm.
Whether I like it or not, I just eat it, just enjoy it, because if I take a bite of something and I'm like, ugh, and then my kids haven't tried it yet. What are the chances they're going to eat that, right? So we try and be very, very like just kind of neutral on things and let them decide, and if they try it, they don't like it, they don't have to eat it. And one thing my wife and I've tried really hard to do is talk about like sometimes foods,
Hmm.
sometimes where it's like we think of like dessert, like it's something we can't have. It's not bad, but it's just a sometimes food. And so like my son started to say that he's been asking like, is this a sometimes food? He's starting to understand things. And so that's something I did not have. Like I never grew up. Um, the only time I ever had dessert was when I was at somebody else's house. Like we never had dessert. I never viewed it as bad, but it just wasn't a normal like part. But then I think somewhere along the way, I even myself, something I struggled with was like, well, I'm going to eat this now because on Monday I'm gonna get back on track or something like that. But what I'm really telling myself is I can't have this food because this is bad. This is bad for me and so like that's really hard to get away from. Like even now, like that's really hard to kind of get out of my mindset. And so like you mentioned your dad was eating like different types of beef, fish, and things like that. You came from a completely different culture and background, and then you moved to even you're still Canada, still North America, but we still live in different different upbringings and stuff. And so how did maybe some of your family members or your parents or anything, how do they view things like dessert, and how did that kind of affect the way you view it?
Well, I actually think of, if you want to call it a negative, but like what society wouldn't typically classify as healthy, but dessert was a totally normal thing in my household. Like my mom, I have a
Okay.
sweet tooth, and now that I think about it, it's probably from my mom. My mom loves to cook; she loves to bake, and it's probably from her that I got my sweet tooth. And it was never really looked at. So any kind of like cakes or treats were looked at as a bad food, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
There was really no food aside from, yeah, like pop, really. So that's the only thing that I can think of that my parents were like, "Hey, don't drink this," and my mom specifically. And this brings up actually a really good point of, uh, it sounds like for you, like, or I don't know, with the parents you deal with, this whole thing of do as I say, not as I do. So my mom,
Right.
as much as she told me not to drink Coke, she loved drinking Coke. And so, like, to the point where growing up, me and my dad were like, "You got to slow down," right? So I mean, eventually she came around, but yeah, that's the thing that parents do to this day, right? So,
Right.
um, luckily, like, she was strict enough that like it wasn't a thing that I drank too much of, but still, that I'm sure
Hmm.
with the people you work with, you come across this where like parents are like, "Hey, like I'm doing this thing, don't do this."
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think my wife. Yeah, it's kind of funny. She actually sells cookies. She bakes cookies and sells them. I told her we have like the best business model in the world, right? I'm working with clients on fitness and nutrition, and she's baking cookies. Like we'll have an endless supply of customers forever. But I remember we were in on our honeymoon. We were in Mexico, and it's like you have like the all you can eat like buffets and stuff, and they have like dessert, all sorts of different things. And I remember getting the dessert, and it was like really tiny, or what I would consider really tiny, right? And I started eating it, and I was like, man, I need like three or four of these. And I sat there for a second. I thought, this is probably the portion what it's actually what it's actually supposed to be. And I was like, and so that's why I started thinking. I was like, you could literally have your cake every single day, if you wanted to, if you ate it in the port. Like our portions are out of control. Like we went to Cheesecake Factory. And if anybody from the Cheesecake Factory is listening, I apologize if I misquote here. But there was a piece of cheesecake there that was, I believe it was I took a picture of it. It was either 1,500 calories or 2,200 calories. Either way, the piece of cheesecake was more than my actual meal. How many calories it was, and I was like, I think that's one of our biggest. That's one of our biggest problems is portion size, portion control. And so that's one thing with with my kids I've been working on is like, like if we have Oreos or something, I'm eating two Oreos, right? I'm not eating the entire sleeve of Oreos and stuff. And so like, yeah, I think, just for me, being a dad has helped, bring some of those things to light. Like if like one question I always ask myself, is like, if I was like a final product today and one of my kids ended up exactly like me, would I be okay with that? And I was like, to me, that's my that's kind of my motivation to keep kind of working on things and getting better, because like one of my kids is going to eventually adopt the habits that I have, right? And like if I'm not okay with that, then I have to change that and stuff. And so I think it sounds like overall, your upbringing was a positive one, and mine was too. I don't want to make it sound like I had a terrible upbringing, but when I was working, so when I was teaching like elementary PE, I would do like nutrition units as well, and I loved them, and I loved doing those. The kids seemed to have a fun time doing all those too, but I found it really hard because you can continue to learn all this stuff, right? You can continue to learn all these things, but if your parents aren't practicing them at home, then it really doesn't matter, right? Like kids don't get to choose their food. It's the parents. And so for me, I'm working with dads. And so like, I feel a personal responsibility to give them the tools, because it's not only affecting them, it's affecting their spouse, it's affecting their kids. When you're working with a client, and I know we're running short on time here, but what are some of the biggest, like what are the, I guess, the big rocks when it comes to nutrition, that if this is the only thing your clients took away from their time working with you, what would you want that to be?
So it's pretty simple, right? Like it's a lot of it is comes down to basics of, you've probably heard this all the time, protein, vegetables, and it's not even really in what you're eating. It's also like I don't want to make it too complicated, but it's also like how you view eating. We're talking about like having a sweet tooth or like eating bad foods. And I was actually talking to this with a client recently, this idea of cheat meals, where that
Yeah.
introduces this like feeling of shame and guilt with certain
Yeah.
foods, where it's just food is food. It depends on what you want to get out of your nutrition, right? So like I'm getting a little bit too complicated here, but like if we're talking about just like big rocks here, if you can stick to mostly whole foods, it's by all means you can still have a little bit more processed foods. In this day and age, it's pretty much impossible to not eat some sort of processed foods. But if
Right.
majority of your diet comes from whole foods, you're in a pretty good starting position, right? Like anything that used to
Mhm.
be being plant based aside, anything with protein, your basic carbs are not bad at all. Like this day and age, like is this seen as this bad food? Um, Carbs are totally fine. I've been eating rice my whole life, and I'm not 300 pounds. So there's really the relationship with food. That's where it comes down to, because there's no shortage of information these days. Like everyone knows, you got to eat protein, you got to eat your vegetables, your fruits, all this stuff. It's like what it's not just what about you're consuming in your mouth. It's also about what you're seeing of like what social media is telling you.
Mhm.
That's why all these bad foods are thought of as bad, because like someone's telling you when they're not really. So I mean, a lot of it
Yeah.
comes down to your goals, right? Obviously, calories depend. If you're working on a more fat loss goal, that's going to play a big part. But if you're someone who just wants to get a little healthier, right? Maybe less processed foods, less cakes, more whole foods. Yeah, it really depends on what you want to work on. If you're an athlete, you probably want more carbs than the regular person. So just different approaches, different foods for different people with different goals.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Just focusing on the big rocks there. I know I always talk about like 80-20, right? Um, just for example, if your calorie goal is like 2,000 calories a day, 80% of that, if you left 300-400 calories for fun foods, I like to call them, you're going to be well on your way. You're never going to feel deprived. You're going to be hitting most of, getting whole foods, hitting your protein, getting all. If you can cover the basics, like it's going to take you a long way. Like most people will never have to, like you talked about athletes and their carb cycle, things like that. Like majority of people never have to even give that a thought, right? Like there's all these things online that you see that really don't. Really aren't going to make a big difference and aren't applicable to most people. But Miles, I appreciate you coming on today. I know for us we've done this twice, right? So I appreciate you coming on here and sharing with us today. I think we had a really cool discussion, kind of learning a little bit more about kind of your background, your upbringing as well, kind of get a different perspective on things. I think that's really cool. But I want to make sure that people can find you online. So where's the best best place to follow you on social media?
So best place to find me is on Instagram. So my handle's at Miles Strength. So that's all one word. I'm also on Facebook at Miles Miles and Suing Suing is my last name. Just search me on there. Those are the two main places you can find me. And yeah, man, this was a pleasure to be on here again. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. I'll make sure the audio is good enough this time to post, and then I'll get all your information, everything posted in the show notes. But thanks again for hopping on, and we'll talk soon. That concludes this episode of the Fatherhood Fitness Podcast. Thank you for those of you who took time out of your busy schedules to listen. If you have any questions or comments or an idea for a topic for a future episode, please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to hear from you.